Around 300 BCE, China was at the height of the Warring States period of the Zhou dynasty, when powerful regional states competed intensely against one another for survival. Yet, this period is remembered not only for warfare, but also for one of the greatest explosions of philosophical thought in Chinese history. Many traditions emerged during this time, including Confucianism and Daoism, which went on to become central to Chinese civilization, even if the surviving traditions represent only a small fraction of the intellectual richness that existed. In this video, we will examine some of the most influential thinkers of the period, how their ideas emerged and interacted with one another, and why some traditions survived while others faded. To orient ourselves to the sheer intellectual richness of this period, we should begin with the name itself, the 100 Schools of Thought. In the original Chinese term, 诸子百家, 子 refers to a master or teacher, so 诸子 means the numerous masters. 百家 literally means the 100 families, with 100 here simply meaning many. The emphasis was therefore on individual teachers and their scholarly lineages. These teachers borrowed freely from one another, and many lineages were likely little more than localized traditions that disappeared after only a few generations. Another Chinese phrase associated with this period, 百家争鸣, the 100 families competing to be heard, reflects the unusually vibrant and competitive intellectual atmosphere of the time. Broad philosophical traditions such as Confucianism and Daoism were therefore, to some extent, later categorizations imposed on a far messier intellectual landscape. The 100 schools emerged against the backdrop of the collapse of the old socio-political order. When the Zhou dynasty was founded around 1000 BCE, it was built around a highly hierarchical aristocratic system in which hereditary fief states, ruled by noble lineages, owed allegiance to the Zhou king. But by the Spring and Autumn period, the surviving states were largely ignoring the authority of the Zhou kings. By the late Spring and Autumn period and early Warring States period, population growth, the expansion of agriculture into newly settled lands, the rise of commerce, increasing urbanization, and the further erosion of hereditary aristocratic privileges had all transformed Chinese society. States also began annexing one another more aggressively, and during the Warring States period, only a handful of major states remained, with their borders increasingly pressed against one another in an intense struggle for survival. These conditions led many people to seek new answers about how individuals should live and how society itself should be organized. The proliferation of written texts, recorded not only on wooden and bamboo strips, but also on silk, helped spread their ideas further. Rulers became exceptionally open to ideas that could strengthen their states, while a rapidly expanding educated class, especially among the lower elites who could no longer rely solely on hereditary privileges, became highly motivated to seek employment and influence. Centers of learning became increasingly influential, most famously the Jixia Academy in Linzi, the capital of the state of Qi, where thinkers from many different traditions gathered and debated their ideas. Political fragmentation also meant that even if an idea was rejected in one state, it might still find patronage and followers elsewhere. Many of the broader philosophical traditions now associated with this period were categorized and recorded a few centuries later during the Han Dynasty. The records of the Grand Historian, compiled around 90 BCE, list 6 major traditions from this era, what we might call the big 4 schools of Chinese philosophy: Legalism, Confucianism, Mohism, and Daoism, along with the school of naturalism and the school of names. Roughly 2 centuries later, the Book of Han further expanded this framework into 10 schools by adding the schools of xiaoshuo, diplomacy, agriculturalism, and syncretism. While this later classification still did not fully capture the diversity of Warring States thought, it nonetheless became the traditional framework for understanding the 100 schools. For this video, we will broadly follow the layout of the Book of Han, beginning with the big 4 philosophies. Legalism emerged as a political philosophy as states cast aside the older, nobility-dominated social order in favor of centralized bureaucratic administration. Fundamentally, legalists believed in the need to break from the past, since historical records such as those of virtuous rulers and harmonious societies may not reflect reality, while the crises of their own age required methods different from those of the past. The survival of the state depended on creating a rich state and powerful army, with agriculture, taxation, military service, and administrative efficiency prioritized above aristocratic tradition. Stable governance depended less on individual moral character and more on systems that could reliably shape behavior through rewards and punishments. Many leading legalist thinkers were influential politicians who directly implemented the policies they advocated. Early figures associated with legalist-style governance included late spring and autumn period statesmen such as Zichan of Zheng and Yanying or Yanzi of Qi, both of whom worked to strengthen central authority and improve bureaucratic efficiency. Zichan was also credited with producing the first publicly displayed written law code in Chinese history, helping to shift political authority away from informal aristocratic customs and toward explicit rules backed directly by the state. In the early Warring States period, Li Kui served as the chief minister of Wei and carried out administrative reforms that became instrumental to the state's rise. Another major early legalist figure was Shen Buhai, a Han minister and political theorist active during the mid to late 300s. The most consequential of them all, however, was Shang Yang, who oversaw a series of reforms in Qin during the 350s BCE. He imposed harsh penalties even for relatively minor offenses, reasoning that if people became too afraid to commit small crimes, they would certainly avoid greater ones. He expanded centralized population registration, taxation, and administrative oversight, while prioritizing agriculture as the foundation of the state. The power of the hereditary aristocracy was broken, with military achievement becoming a major path for social advancement. His reforms transformed Qin into the dominant power of the Warring States period, allowing it to eventually conquer the remaining eastern states in 221 BCE and establish the Qin dynasty. Another key legalist figure was Han Fei, who lived in the final decades of the Warring States before the Qin conquest of the East. Han Fei wrote the text Han Fei Zi, which has largely survived intact. The Han Fei Zi, amidst broader discussions of political theory and human behavior, synthesizes the legalist statecraft of its time into three categories: Fa, Shu, and Shi. Fa, or laws and standards, refers to objective rules broadly applied across society, such as formal legal codes. Shu refers to the administrative methods rulers used to monitor and control officials, including systems for auditing performance and verifying results. Shi refers to the power of position itself. Authority came from holding office rather than from personal charisma or moral virtue. Ultimately, Han Fei envisioned an impersonal political system that relied less on the moral character of rulers, officials, and subjects than on institutions capable of producing predictable outcomes. Outside of legalism, another prominent philosophical system was Confucianism, which developed around the same time as legalism. Its founder, Kongqiu, better known as Kongzi, Master Kong, or Confucius in English, came from low-ranking nobility in the state of Lu. Confucius confronted many of the same problems as the legalists: the collapse of the old social order, powerful nobles dominating weakened states, and widespread instability. But unlike the legalists, who emphasized stronger laws and punishments, Confucius believed the solution lay in a return to the ideals of the Western Zhou dynasty, with individuals becoming morally responsible through learning and self-cultivation. Central to his thought was li, or ritual, the proper conduct of a person according to their role in society. Ritual was not confined to ceremonies, but rather embedded in daily life, as rulers, subjects, and family members fulfilled reciprocal responsibilities within a structured hierarchy. Closely tied to ritual was ren, often translated as benevolence, but better understood as human moral conduct, loving others and treating them properly according to one's roles and relationships. Even though Confucius, like the legalists, argued for political reform, he emphasized moral legitimacy and cultural development rather than military or political advantage. The primary text preserving Confucius's quotes and teachings, the Analects of Confucius, was compiled by his followers, traditionally because so many competing interpretations of his ideas were already circulating soon after his death that an authoritative version needed to be established. At only 16,000 characters long, the Analects is primarily a work of moral philosophy, written in short aphorisms, with sayings such as, "Do not impose on others what you yourself do not desire. When 3 people walk together, one of them can always be my teacher. The gentleman seeks harmony, not uniformity." The structure of the Analects means that it focuses less on abstract explanations of why morality works and more on how one should behave, with the implication that by practicing the how consistently, the why emerges naturally. Although the Analects is by far the Confucian text most familiar to modern audiences today, the broader corpus associated with Confucius is far larger. Confucius ultimately saw himself as a teacher who used the past to educate the present, and to do so, he needed to preserve the past itself as a source of moral and political examples. As a result, Confucius was traditionally said to have recompiled, edited, and commented upon a large number of earlier works. These included the Classic of Poetry, a collection of poems and folk traditions ranging from court hymns to songs about love and peasant life. The Book of Documents, a collection of speeches and other documents from the early Zhou dynasty. The Book of Rites, which discusses rituals, ceremonies, and proper social conduct, although much of the text was written in the centuries after Confucius's death. The Classic of Music, now lost. The Book of Changes, often known in the West by its Chinese name, the Yi Jing, a divination text that gradually accumulated layers of cosmological and philosophical interpretation. And finally, the Spring and Autumn Annals, the historical chronicle of Confucius's home state of Lu. The text was traditionally attributed to Confucius himself, although it may simply have been based on the official state archives of Lu that Confucius worked on. The Spring and Autumn Annals eventually gave its name to the entire Spring and Autumn period of Chinese history, and together with its associated commentary, the Zuozhuan, became the most significant historical sources for the period it describes. The ideas of Confucius spread in the generations after his death, especially in eastern states such as Lu and Qi, and were further developed by later thinkers. His followers were said to have been divided into numerous lineages, including that of his student Zengzi, Master Zeng. Zengzi, in turn, taught Zisi, the grandson of Confucius, from whose lineage came Meng Ke, better known as Mengzi, Master Meng, or in English, Mencius, the second great Confucian philosopher. Mencius was active through much of the 300s BCE and traveled widely, including to the court of King Hui of Wei at Daliang, where he at times criticized the king's excesses. He also spent time in Qi, holding a prominent position at the Jixia Academy in Linzi. His teachings were later compiled in the text known as the Mencius. Unlike Confucius, who was more concerned with outward social harmony, Mencius focused more on inner human nature. He argued that people are born fundamentally good and possess the potential to become sages, as illustrated by his famous example that anyone would feel alarm at seeing a child about to fall into a well. Moral character, however, still required cultivation through education and proper social conditions. He was especially concerned with the concept of yi, righteousness, doing what is right out of an internal sense of justice rather than for external reward. Politically, Mencius famously stated that the people are most important, the state comes next, the ruler last. He held that a ruler's legitimacy depended on protecting the people's livelihood and governing fairly, and an unjust ruler could justifiably be overthrown or even killed. Another major figure was Xunzi. Master Xun, who lived slightly later than Mencius. Unlike Mencius, who argued that human nature was fundamentally good, Xunzi believed human nature was inherently flawed and required discipline, education, and social structure to be improved. His ideas were highly influential in later political thought, especially as a bridge between Confucian and legalist approaches, and several prominent legalist statesmen of the late Warring States period, including Han Fei, were his students. During the Warring States, Confucianism did not spread as rapidly as legalism, as rulers often prioritized immediate political survival. Yet, it persisted as an intellectual tradition, providing a highly adaptable framework for building long-term political legitimacy, something legalist systems often struggle to provide on their own. By around 100 BCE, Confucianism had been adopted as official state orthodoxy and largely remained so until the end of imperial rule in 1911. In the early imperial period, Xunzi's more legalist-adjacent interpretation of Confucianism was relatively prominent. But over time, as the imperial state became more established, the more optimistic, human-centered outlook of Mencius became more dominant, even as some of his more radical claims, such as the primacy of the people over the ruler, were downplayed. The main thread of Confucianism over the past millennium, Neo-Confucianism, was shaped in part by the inward-looking, disciplined self-cultivation of Buddhist and Daoist traditions, and thus placed even greater emphasis on Mencius. It has also highlighted both Zengzi and Zisi, who served as bridges between Confucius and Mencius. In the Neo-Confucian tradition, one passage from the Book of Rites, known as the Great Learning, was given special importance. Since texts such as the Book of Rites had been copied, edited, and expanded upon by countless scholars over the centuries, the exact provenance of the Great Learning remains unclear. In later tradition, however, the Great Learning was attributed to Confucius's star pupil Zengzi, with its opening section only a little over 200 characters long, traditionally understood as directly summarizing Confucius's teachings, with the longer, later sections serving as commentary. The Great Learning discusses how individual growth could shape the family, the state, and eventually society as a whole. The title Great Learning, or 大学, distinguishes it from Little Learning, or 小学. Little Learning refers primarily to the basic education of children, such as literacy, while Great Learning refers to the moral and intellectual development expected of educated adults. The influence of this distinction remains visible in modern Chinese today, where 小学 means elementary school, while 大学 means university. Another passage from the Book of Rites that later became central to Neo-Confucianism is the Doctrine of the Mean, 中庸, traditionally attributed to Zisi. The Doctrine of the Mean focuses more heavily on how individuals could actually achieve the ideals laid out in the Great Learning, discussing emotional self-regulation and how to respond appropriately across a wide range of situations, while emphasizing sincerity, 诚, as a foundational virtue. Together with the Analects and the Mencius, these texts eventually form the Four Books of Confucianism, which has become the intellectual centerpiece of the tradition over the past 1,000 years. Legalism, however, never disappeared. Despite their differences, Confucianism and legalism shared core concerns: maintaining social order, strengthening the state, and securing stable livelihoods for the common people. In practice, Chinese governments rarely relied on either alone. A common later description of traditional Chinese governing philosophy has been Confucian on the outside, legalist on the inside, projecting moral ideas publicly while relying on pragmatic administrative methods behind the scenes. The third philosophical system was Mohism. Although it competed actively with legalism and Confucianism during the Warring States, it is largely forgotten today, a reminder to us that not every prominent philosophy survives. Its founder, Mo Zhai, or Mozi, Master Mo, lived around the transition into the Warring States. He likely came from an artisan or lower aristocratic background in Song or Lu, and his followers developed into hierarchical, guild-like traveling groups. groups. Mohists observed that the ruling elites prioritized population and economic growth through heavy-handed control, while the common people frequently lacked basic necessities such as food and clothing. To resolve these tensions, they believed that individuals should care for all others, not just those close to them. In practical terms, this meant early marriage to promote population growth, and across society as a whole, each person should contribute what they could. The strong their labor, the wealthy their resources, and the educated their knowledge. People were to live simply, minimize consumption, and avoid waste, with rituals, including even the arts, seen as wasteful. They believed in strong, centralized states guided by meritocratic leadership, in which the rulers had strong authority over their subjects. They opposed offensive warfare while remaining highly committed to defense, developing significant expertise in engineering, fortifications, and siege weaponry. In one well-known case, a group of Mohists helped the state of Song successfully prepare defenses against a Chu invasion. Mohists, like both legalists and Confucians, valued meritocracy, hierarchy, and centralization, but grounded them in their principle of universal love. This puts them in direct conflict with both groups. Legalists did not care much for love and rather enjoyed offensive warfare, while Confucians liked their arts and rituals and believed that our moral obligations are strongest toward those closest to us. Mohism ultimately alienated both and was squeezed out of mainstream Chinese philosophy. Finally, there is Daoism. While there were numerous philosophical lineages associated with early Daoism, the two most commonly remembered from this period were those from the Daoism and the Zhuangzi. Both texts are widely read today and explore many similar themes, although each with its own distinct emphasis. The Daoism is traditionally attributed to Li Er, more commonly known as Lao Tzu, literally the old master, who is said to have been a librarian at the Zhou court and to have at one point taught Confucius. The text is exceptionally short, a little over 5,000 characters long, and is divided into 81 passages. Its title refers to two core ideas, Dao and De. Dao literally means the path, but here it refers to the underlying patterns by which the natural world functions, even while recognizing that the totality of nature ultimately cannot be fully known. The text repeatedly observes that change is constant, things naturally wax and wane, being and non-being are often two sides of the same whole, concepts such as good and bad are relative to perspective, and language, while necessary for communication, can distort reality. De, usually meaning virtue in modern usage, in this context refers to how humans can live in alignment with the Tao. A key expression of De is Wu Wei, often translated as non-action, but more accurately understood as not forcing actions that run against the natural order. The principles of Dao, De, and Wu Wei, often presented through paradox and non-intuitive framing, are applicable across human life. On an individual level, they encourage the tranquility of the mind, adaptability, and harmonious relationships, while on a broader level, they support restrained governance and strategic, patient military leadership. In this sense, the Daoism can be read as a critique of both legalist and Confucian tendencies toward heavy social structuring and intervention, arguing that the more artificial a system becomes, the more disorder it creates. While legalists and Confucians often emphasized competition and the recognition of success, the Daoism warns that excessive rewards can push people to pursue the wrong goals. The Zhuangzi is attributed to Zhuangzhou, or Zhuangzi, Master Zhuang, who is said to have come from the state of Song and may have been a slightly younger contemporary of Mencius. Part of the Zhuangzi may have been written by Zhuangzhou himself, while much of the rest was likely added by later authors. The structure of the Zhuangzi differs significantly from the short entries of the Daoism. Although it contains large sections of dense philosophical reflection, it is best remembered for its fictional stories, which are sometimes deliberately absurd. In the Zhuangzi, the Dao is accessible to individuals through spontaneity and naturalness, and it leans even more strongly than the Daoism into the idea that truth and objective reality are shaped by perspective. This is most famously illustrated in the story in which Zhuangzhou dreams he is a butterfly, fluttering freely and unaware he is Zhuangzhou, and upon waking, wonders whether he is Zhuangzhou who dreamed he was a butterfly, or a butterfly now dreaming he is Zhuangzhou. It also explores the theme of usefulness versus uselessness, illustrated by the story of a crooked tree whose wood was unsuitable to humans. But precisely because it was so useless to humans, it was able to survive intact. And while the Tao Te Ching can still be interpreted within the context of a structured society that includes hierarchy, the Zhuangzi is far more anti-authority in tone. It is deeply skeptical of political life itself, sometimes to the point of advocating withdrawal from active participation in society. The influence of Laozi and Zhuangzi on Daoism is so significant that the tradition is often referred to as Lao Zhuang, although many other thinkers were also grouped under the Taoist umbrella. One was Liezi, even if the writings attributed to him may have been compiled centuries later. The Liezi contains the famous story of the foolish old man who removes the mountains, in which an old man resolves to slowly dig away 2 mountains blocking his path, arguing to his critics that while he will die, future generations will continue the work. Another philosopher was Yang Zhu, who emphasized valuing the self while resisting external coercion and exploitation. Only fragments of his ideas survive, mostly through summaries by other thinkers such as Mencius, who lamented his popularity and accused him of being unwilling to pluck a single hair to benefit the world. Still, other thinkers associated with Taoism were more closely tied to political philosophy. Among them was Shen Dao, who helped pioneer the concept of shi, the power of position or institutional authority, which later became a major pillar of legalism. Indeed, the Book of Han ultimately classifies him as a legalist rather than a Taoist. Shen Dao and many other scholars were also associated with Huanglao thought, a tradition that combined teachings attributed to the mythical Yellow Emperor, Huangdi, with those of Laozi. Huanglao generally emphasized restrained government and ruling through non-action, or Wu Wei, in contrast to the more interventionist tendencies of legalism. Outside of the big 4 philosophies were 2 additional schools listed in the records of the Grand Historian: the School of Naturalism and the School of Names. The School of Naturalism, also known as the School of Yin-Yang, was strongly associated with Zhou Yan, who was active at the Jixia Academy during the late Warring States period. This school held that the universe is composed of 2 interconnected forces: yin, shade, passivity, and femininity, and yang, light, activity, and masculinity, as well as 5 elements: metal, wood, water, fire, and earth, between which cyclical changes occur. It sought connections between natural and human order, attempting to explain political rise and fall within a broader cosmic framework. The School of Names, on the other hand, focused on debating topics such as language, categorization, and logic, although its arguments survive only in fragments. One of its associated thinkers, Gongsun Long, for example, was known for paradoxes such as "a white horse is not a horse." Discussions like this went beyond abstract wordplay and explored the relationship between language, classification, and reality. Next, we should discuss the 4 additional schools that were further introduced in the Book of Han. The School of Xiaoshuo, literally minor tales, refers to collections of anecdotes, gossip, rumors, and local sayings, especially outside of highbrow scholarly and philosophical circles. The term xiaoshuo eventually evolved into the modern Chinese word for novels. Next to nothing has survived from this school, as it stood in contrast to the more systematic philosophical traditions. Very sadly, too, since if it had survived, it might have preserved some of the most fascinating details of everyday life from the period. The School of Diplomacy, also called the School of the Vertical and the Horizontal, focused on diplomacy as a response to the intense interstate competition of the Warring States period. Vertical alliances referred to coalitions of weaker states aligned against a larger power, while horizontal alliances referred to weaker states aligning with a stronger one. Its thinkers were often wandering scholars moving between courts, using rhetoric to convince rulers to wage particular wars or adopt particular alliances. Unlike Confucians, who emphasized moral virtue, or legalists, who focused on building institutions, the school of diplomacy prioritized manipulating interstate relations to maximize immediate political advantage. A later compilation of its texts, The Strategies of the Warring States, preserves many stories and speeches associated with this tradition, and the Warring States period itself takes its name from this text. The school of agriculturalism emphasized agriculture as the foundation of society. It was associated especially with the mythical sage ruler Shen Nong, the divine farmer, who was credited with inventing agriculture and medicine. In addition to promoting agricultural techniques, agriculturalists believed rulers should participate directly in productive labor rather than stand apart from ordinary people. Texts attributed to this tradition are almost completely lost, and what we know about it comes largely from fragments preserved by other schools. Confucians, for example, criticized the agriculturalists' support for fixed prices and their opposition to the division of labor in society. And finally, there was the school of syncretism, a later classification for thinkers who attempted to combine ideas from multiple philosophical traditions. One early figure associated with this tradition was Shizi, who was active in the state of Qin during the mid-300s under Shangyang. After Shangyang's defeat and death, he went into exile and wrote the Shizi, which now survives only in remnants preserved through quotations in other sources. He advocated legalist statecraft while drawing upon ideas from Confucianism, Mohism, and Daoism. There was also the Lü Shi Chunqiu, compiled in 239 BCE during the final years of the Warring States period under the direction of Lü Bu-wei, who controlled the Qin government at the time. Intended as an encyclopedia of contemporary knowledge, it covered not only the major philosophical traditions, but also subjects such as astronomy, calendrics, music, and agriculture. After its completion, Lü Bu-wei reportedly had the work publicly displayed in the market of the Qin capital at Xianyang and offered 1,000 pieces of gold to anyone who could improve it by adding or removing even a single character. An offer that, given the circumstances, nobody took. A third influential syncretic text is the Huainanzi, although it was compiled in the mid-100s during the Western Han Dynasty and thus falls outside of the Warring States period. One additional text worth mentioning is the Guanzi. The Book of Han classifies it as Taoist, although later sources place it under legalism, while many modern scholars regard it as a syncretic work. The text is traditionally attributed to Guanzhong, the chief minister of Qi in the mid-600s BCE during the spring and autumn period, who led his state to hegemony, although it was likely compiled centuries later during the Warring States period at the Jixia Academy, with some sections added during the Han Dynasty. It is a massive work that has largely survived intact, covering not only Taoist, legalist, and school of names ideas, but also subjects such as astronomy, calendrics, agriculture, and economics. In many ways, it can be viewed as a compilation of the knowledge accumulated at the Jixia Academy. Even though we often think about the 100 schools of thought through the lens of the 10 schools classified in the Book of Han, many additional intellectual traditions still fell outside of these categories. The most obvious omission was military thought, especially The Art of War by Sun Tzu, along with numerous other texts, some lost and some surviving, that discussed topics such as warfare, logistics, discipline, deception, and intelligence. Many of the ideas in The Art of War and related texts overlapped heavily with Daoism, legalism, and the school of diplomacy. Numerous technical fields also developed during this period, including medicine, astronomy, mathematics, and engineering. There were also various proto-religious and occult traditions, including alchemists, immortality seekers, and magicians. Together, these traditions formed an extraordinarily vibrant intellectual world. In the final decade of the Warring States period, the state of Qin quickly conquered the 6 eastern states, unifying China in 221 and establishing the Qin dynasty. The king of Qin declared himself emperor, becoming known in history as Qin Shi Huang, the Qin first emperor. Qin Shi Huang introduced harsh and dramatic reforms aimed at centralizing his empire, and he is traditionally remembered as a tyrant. One of his most notorious acts was the burning of books and burying of scholars. Later accounts claim that hundreds of scholars were executed, although the number was likely exaggerated, and many of those killed were not scholars, but rather specialists in divination, alchemy, and other esoteric arts whom the emperor believed had deceived him with promises that he could achieve immortality. As for the destruction of books, since the Qin dynasty was attempting to create a radically new political order, it sought to suppress ideas that contradicted this new vision of the state. The historical records from the conquered states were actively targeted, while Qin state records were preserved. Philosophical writings, rather than circulating widely as before, were generally restricted to officially sanctioned scholars, while privately held copies were destroyed. Those wishing to study law were expected to learn directly from government officials. Practical works on subjects such as agriculture, medicine, and divination were exempt from these restrictions. Possession of banned books could result in the execution of the entire family. These policies likely dealt a heavy blow to many scholarly traditions, although their impact on Confucianism is the best attested. The Confucian practice of using historical precedent to guide the present placed enormous importance on preserving the past itself, the very thing that the Qin dynasty wanted to erase. As a result, while core Confucian works such as the Analects of Confucius survived, much of its broader corpus suffered catastrophic losses. The classic of music, aside from scattered fragments, was lost during this transition. The Book of Documents also suffered major losses, and the authenticity of many surviving passages became the subject of intense scholarly debate over the following centuries. Qin Shi Huang's brutality contributed to the rapid fall of his dynasty, which likely made many of the scholarship losses under him permanent. By concentrating texts within the Qin state archives, the empire had reduced the redundancy and broad circulation that normally helped ancient writings survive. When the Qin capital at Xianyang was sacked and burned to the ground in 206 BCE, many of the texts that survived the earlier restriction on books may have been lost along with it. After the Western Han dynasty was founded in 202, the government continued to face existential political and military threats while struggling to rebuild a coherent empire across a devastated land. Preserving knowledge required significant resources and was simply not a priority. The Han dynasty itself also continued many Qin policies with restrictions on private book ownership, for example, remaining in place until 191, a full 3 decades after the Qin conquest of the East. As such, even the scholars who survived the transition from Qin to Han may have struggled to pass their knowledge on to later generations. Scholarship gradually made a comeback under the Han dynasty. Liu Jiao, the younger brother of Emperor Gaozu, the founding emperor of the Han dynasty, was himself a talented scholar who studied the classic of poetry under a disciple of the Confucian philosopher Xunzi until the Qin destruction of books disrupted his education. As the Prince of Chu, he became a prominent patron of scholarship until his death in 179. Later, in the mid to late 100s, Liu An, the Prince of Huainan, oversaw the compilation of the Huainanzi, one of the key texts in the school of syncretism, which draws heavily upon Daoist philosophy while incorporating ideas from Confucianism, legalism, naturalism, and other traditions. During the early Han Dynasty, the dominant political philosophy was Huanglao thought, usually associated with Daoism but heavily influenced by legalism. Huanglao thinkers advocated governing in accordance with the natural order while minimizing excessive taxation, punishment, and state intervention. Its popularity was shaped in part by the early Han emperor's desire to rebuild after the turmoil of the Qin dynasty's collapse. Then, during the reign of Emperor Wu from 141 to 87 BCE, Confucianism finally emerged as the dominant state ideology. The version of Confucianism adopted by Emperor Wu was heavily shaped by the scholar Dong Zhongshu, who, in addition to expounding Confucian moral philosophy, also borrowed heavily from the school of naturalism. Integrating yin-yang and five elements cosmology into Confucian thought and arguing that human society reflected the order of the cosmos itself. Some of these ideas had already been used to frame the Qin conquest as part of a larger cosmic order, and under the Han Dynasty, they continued to provide ideological legitimacy for imperial rule. Omens, disasters, and other natural phenomena could therefore be interpreted as signs of heaven's approval or disapproval of the emperor, while the rise and fall of dynasties reflect larger cosmic patterns. As the Han Dynasty became more stable and centralized, the boundaries between the old schools increasingly blurred, while many schools that could not be easily integrated into the imperial order gradually disappeared. The school of names vanished as a distinct intellectual tradition. The school of diplomacy lost the political environment that had given rise to it, although rhetoric and political maneuvering remained important parts of imperial politics. Mohism lost its place as an independent school since the unified empire left less room for the wandering scholars, defensive engineers, and anti-war activism that had once defined the tradition, even if the text of the Mozi has largely survived. While agriculture remained central to Confucian statecraft, agriculturalism lost its identity as a distinct school, with many of its more radical social proposals fading away. Smaller traditions such as the school of Xiaoshuo likewise disappeared. Despite the overwhelming influence of Confucianism, Daoism has nonetheless maintained its status as a distinct intellectual tradition. The Dao De Jing and the Zhuangzi have remained enduringly popular throughout Chinese history and continue to be widely read today. Outside of these works, from the Taoist school of thought itself, a number of later religious communities, priesthoods, and ritual traditions have revered Laozi as a divine figure and drawn inspiration from texts such as the Dao De Jing, eventually becoming part of the broader Taoist tradition. As Western scholars encountered these diverse forms of Taoism, a common heuristic emerged distinguishing between philosophical and religious Taoism. Earlier texts such as the Dao De Jing and the Zhuangzi are often associated with philosophical Taoism, while later practices such as priesthoods, temples, immortality cults, pantheons of gods, and folk religion, along with associated beliefs such as alchemy and divination, may be grouped under religious Taoism. The boundary between these two categories is often blurry, but the distinction remains useful for understanding the different strands that exist under the broader umbrella of Taoism. Today, Confucianism and Taoism are the primary surviving traditions from the 100 schools of thought. Over the centuries, both traditions have expanded far beyond their original foundations to, in a sense, represent contrasting approaches to life itself. Confucianism became increasingly associated with public life, including politics, education, and social order, and many traditions compatible with these goals were gradually absorbed into the broader Confucian world. Emperors and scholar officials might promote Confucian morality while simultaneously employing pragmatic administrative statecraft, praying to heaven for favorable weather and imperial stability, debating the role of settled agriculture against other forms of economic life, using rhetoric for political advantage, and drawing upon cosmology to legitimize imperial rule. The original concern of Confucianism, after all, was restoring an idealized Zhou political political and social order, while many of its competing schools proposed alternative responses to the collapse of that order. As Confucianism became institutionalized, things came full circle. Many traditions that had originally branched away from Zhou orthodoxy were eventually absorbed and used to legitimize new imperial orthodoxies. Daoism, meanwhile, became increasingly associated with life away from public affairs, absorbing traditions connected to self-cultivation, longevity practices, and withdrawal from worldly ambition. A recurring pattern throughout Chinese history was for elites to openly embrace Confucianism in public life while privately turning toward Taoist ideas, especially during periods of political failure or retirement. And in later centuries, Buddhism would also be introduced from India, emerging as a third major intellectual and religious tradition in China. Ultimately, despite the categories they had been placed under, these traditions never fully separated from one another, but continued to overlap, interact, and reshape one another across the centuries.